Lots of the discussion today is centered around what's going to happen under the new administration. As we were sitting here today, NOAA announced that 2016 was once again the warmest year on record for the third year in a row. So I think regardless of what happens under Trump, dozens of states are moving forward with pretty aggressive state policy targeted at carbon reductions from power plants, targeting renewable production from low and zero carbon emitting resources, and targeting energy efficiency programs. All of those will continue regardless of what happens at the federal level. RGGI is one of those programs that we're going to talk about, but I want to make sure that everyone is clear that there are dozens and dozens of states that either have renewable portfolio standards, energy efficiency resource standards, or carbon trading programs like RGGI, other similar programs. California's got a similar cap and trade program. There's also the Western Climate Initiative. The vast majority of those state level policies have requirements that are going to ramp very, very quickly over the next 5 to 10 years. Those happen irrespective of federal policy. So what I'll talk about at the end is potential intersection between RGGI and the proposed Clean Power Plan and what may or may not happen there. So what I'm planning to cover is just what is RGGI, how does it work, what has happened to date, and I'll talk a little bit about one of the studies I did with a number of my colleagues at Analysis Group, quantifying the impact of RGGI to date. That's sort of the net economic impact in electric markets. What has it cost us? Who are the winners and the losers? And what have the impacts been on a macroeconomic basis? And then again at the end, I'll just touch upon the Clean Power Plan and opportunities and challenges presented there. So what is RGGI? RGGI was the country's first cap and trade program targeted at carbon dioxide emissions. It began with voluntary agreement signed on by what was initially 10 states. After the first compliance period, which ended in 2011, New Jersey dropped out. The remaining 9 initial states are all still there. The program continues to run. Right now, carbon caps have been agreed upon by all of the states through 2020. So RGGI covers 3 ISOs, RTOs. All of the New England states are in there, New York covering NISO, obviously, and then parts of PJM are covered. So what is RGGI? It's a cap and trade program for carbon dioxide. If you are a power plant owner who emits carbon dioxide in your 25 megawatts or larger, you must buy permits to emit CO2. At the end of the 3-year compliance period, you have to show that, yep, I've got enough credits purchased at auction to offset your actual carbon dioxide emissions. It's a single quarterly auction, single clearing price. It's sealed bids. So what happens is there's a set quantity of available allowances. Everyone submits an offer if you're interested in buying any allowances. RGGI serves as the clearinghouse, RGGI Inc., and matches supply with demand and sets that single clearing price that then clears the markets. One of the really interesting design features about RGGI is that rather than allocate CO2 permits to power plant owners initially, which a number of cap and trade programs had done in the past, with RGGI, there's zero free allocation. All of those auction revenues are sent right back to the states, and they have discretion over how those auction revenue proceeds are then reinvested. And we'll come back to that later. We touched upon a couple of these already, but 3-year compliance period. Right now, we're in the middle of the 3rd compliance period, which will end in 2017. Banking is allowed, meaning if you are a power plant and you realize, oh geez, I bought too many permits for the 2nd compliance period, you're allowed to bank those and use those for later use, with a caveat that you can only bank up to 50% of your 3-year obligation. Offsets are allowed, up to a very limited extent. It can be up to 3.3% of your annual obligation. What do I mean by an offset? Something that comes outside of the fence that would otherwise reduce carbon dioxide. It might be reforestation, for example. Another one of the features is that there has always been a reserve price set, meaning this is a price that serves as a floor for the market. Beginning in 2014, we'll get to this, but there was a redesign of the program that substantially reduced the cap of available allowances for the second compliance period and beyond. As a result, the states agreed that they would put in place what they're calling a cost containment reserve. Basically, if market prices hit a certain threshold, it automatically releases a number of additional allowances into the market to try to offset that higher price in order to provide some sort of bounds in terms of we've got a minimum price, we're hopefully going to have a maximum price here. The CCR was set at an additional 5 million allowances for the year 2014 when the revised cap was implemented. So 5 million, it was hit. 5 million allowances are added to the market once market prices hit $4 per ton. In 2015 and beyond, if the auction clearing price hits $6 a ton, that automatically triggers the release of an additional 10 million tons of permits annually. Leakage is monitored but not enforced. So what do I mean by leakage? I mean, think back to that map where you've got those 9 RGGI states. You may have a power plant in Pennsylvania that imports electricity into Delaware or Maryland, a coal-fired power plant, thereby offsetting what would otherwise be reductions in carbon from carbon-emitting resources in those states. Another part of the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding agreed to by the states, was that there would be periodic program reviews asking questions about how have the options been working, do we need to revise the design at all. The 2012 program review was what resulted in the reduction of the cap for years 2014 and beyond. We're currently in the 2016 program review, which is looking at what is this program going to look like for the years 2020 and beyond. So what has the cap looked like over time? If you look at the blue bar here, this is what actual emissions have looked like in the RGGI states over the last 20 years or so. When the MOU was originally put in place in 2005, the states agreed to, so RGGI begins in 2009, and what the states did is collectively agree to what they thought emissions would look like in the 10-state region, then 10 states, in 2009. That's the red line. So if you look at, does this have a light that I can turn on or not? Yeah.
It should, yeah.
Nope.
That's not it.
That's not it. Sorry.
On the back?
All right, I'm just going to talk through this. If you look at the blue line, what's that?
The back of the folder, these buttons on the back.
I can just talk through it. If you look at the first box there, December in 2005, right? So you're standing there and you're predicting that 2009 emission levels are going to be right at the start of that red bar. States agreed, let's hold emissions constant at what we think 2009 emissions are going to look like. Let's hold them constant for a few years, and then let's start to gradually require a reduction in emissions. Reality set in, and emissions have looked radically different than what was originally predicted. Question is why? What often comes to mind is we've got the 2008-2009 financial crisis when thanks. Thank you. GDP falls. And that certainly played a role, right? Electric consumption and demand fell. However, if you look at what this is showing is Blue line again is actual emission levels. The green dotted line are electric sales, reflecting electric consumption. So it's not just a demand-driven reduction. There are a number of structural changes in the market, like we just heard about shale gas, oil prices collapsing. Again, these states are pursuing energy efficiency and renewable energy investment, which also serve as offsets. So a number of factors at play here. So again, I think I touched upon earlier what happens in 2012. We've got the first program review. States realized, oh geez, we over-allocated the number of available permits for sale. And so states agreed to, beginning in 2014, moving forward, adjust the cap of available allowances. That's the green line there, the solid green line. States also realized there had been an incredible amount of banking of allowances that were still being held onto. So lots of power plant owners still had many permits to emit CO2 that hadn't yet been released into the market. So what they do is make an adjustment. And so that dotted green line is the actual cap that we're working under now in terms of what the quarterly auctions make available into the market. All right, so what has happened with prices? The blue lines, the blue bars are showing the quarterly auction proceeds, again, that have been sent back to the states for reinvestment. The green line is showing the clearing price, so the quarterly auction clearing price. As you can see, through 2012, a large portion of the clearing prices were at that floor price, right, that reserve price, reflecting the fact that there were more permits available than were actually needed. What happens in 2013 is the 2012 program review is underway. People began to realize correctly that the cap was going to get adjusted. And so even though the revised emissions cap was not yet in place, people are anticipating changes, start to bid up the price and take all of the available allowances. Since that revision in the emissions cap, prices have been markedly higher, always above the reserve price, and you can see the two red bars are showing the 2 times to date where the cost containment reserve has been hit, meaning they're triggering the release of those additional $5 million and $10 million allowances in those 2 periods. This is showing the first 34 auctions. There's been 2 additional auctions that are not on this chart. Prices have continued to fall since then. Auction 33 was $4.54, and the most recent auction, which was in December, the clearing price was $3.55. So again, coming back down. So remember I said one of the key features of RGGI is that auction proceeds went back to the states. One of the things I've done with a number of my colleagues at Analysis Group is again, study the impacts of what has happened to those expenditures and what's been the net impact in electric markets. So we conducted a study first of the first compliance period, and more recently the second compliance period, which is the years 2012 to 2014. And we have tracked initially what did the states do with these auction proceeds that came back to them. The original MOU specified that at least 25% of the auction proceeds would be reinvested in places that would produce consumer benefit or strategic energy purposes. In fact, the states have been much more aggressive in that. And you can see that the majority of the auction proceeds were reinvested in either energy efficiency, renewable energy programs, and in many cases, direct bill assistance for low-income consumers. So how do you think about actually measuring what the impact of RGGI has been? So you've got impacts in the electric market. On the one hand, you've got power plants that every quarter now need to buy a permit to emit carbon dioxide. What do they do in the wholesale markets? Well, they're going to bid into those markets, including that price, right? So this is effectively a carbon tax that electric prices now reflect. So there's a shift in marginal units, whereby when you kind of do the math, it's been largely a wash for gas power plants. It's been a net cost for coal-fired units, and it's been a win for any low or zero carbon-emitting resource. In the local economy, so you've got impacts in the electric market in terms of, on the one hand, you've got electric generators bidding in at a higher price to reflect this carbon tax. On the other hand, you've got offsetting impacts, because as the states are plowing these dollars back into energy efficiency, you're reducing demand. As you're plowing those dollars into renewable energy investment, you're increasing supply of lower marginal cost resources. So you've got these competing effects that you need to quantify. And then separately, we quantify what is the actual macroeconomic impact in states of expending these resources. So if you're plowing millions and millions of dollars a year extra into energy efficiency programs, okay, you need more auditors. That creates jobs. Those auditors now have new income, and they turn around and they spend it at a restaurant. So now the waitress has more money. So those are direct, indirect, and induced impacts that we quantify. This is a diagram of how we did it. It's actually pretty complicated. So I'm not going to walk through it, but this is trying to lay out how we actually went about this analysis. So we used ProMod, which is an electric power dispatch model. What we did is create two worlds. One is a world with RGGI as it actually stood, so the reality that we've all experienced since 2009. And then you create a but-for world for what would market prices have looked like, what would supply have looked like without RGGI, and then you get the corresponding prices. You take that difference, that gives you the impact in electric markets. And then separately, you're going to take those outputs and plug them into a model which is called IMPLAN, which is an input-output model, allows you to quantify those direct, indirect, and induced impacts. So what did we actually find? The losers here on net are the power plant owners, no surprise. They have had what is effectively a tax added on to the cost of doing business. The winners here are consumers who have benefited from energy efficiency investments, renewable energy investments that more than offset the increase in price in electric markets. So if you think of an energy efficiency measure, right, a light bulb that lasts you 10 years, that might have been paid for and reflected in the price of electric prices in compliance period 1, but that's going to yield benefits over that 10-year life of that measure. So when you quantify the aggregate energy savings from those measures and calculate it on a net present value, consumers are large net winners here. So there's bill reductions in electric markets. As I'm sure you all know, lots of energy efficiency measures also yield reductions in terms of the amount of gas you need. So there's therm reductions as well in terms of avoided natural gas. Then the blue bar here is what we talked about, the macroeconomic impacts of the state expenditures of the RGGI proceeds. And then the aggregate here, this gray bar, is what has been the total impact. And just to lay these numbers out here, so it's about $1 billion in allowance proceeds for the second compliance period, resulting in an aggregate net economic impact of $1.3 billion. Consumers are winners, power plants are losers. Another impact relevant for New England states is there's been a large avoided expenditure from out-of-state fossil fuels. So New England is not a gas-producing region. We import lots of that. From a state policy perspective, that's an attractive retained value or avoided value. And then we estimated 14,000 jobs created as a result of the expenditures of those auction proceeds. Am I doing okay time-wise? Okay. In terms of key observations, the markets functioned incredibly well. The decision by the states originally to agree to reinvest those auction proceeds, to retain the value of the auction proceeds and then reinvest them in energy efficiency and renewable energy has been a huge winner. I think a lot of states weren't expecting to actually receive sort of net aggregate benefits, right? A lot of people think, okay, carbon tax, this is a jobs killer, this is going to be a disaster, this is why we can't have this. These states have shown if you design the cap and trade program appropriately, it can provide very real economic benefits to the region. The other point just to draw out is the MOU again agrees states are going to get the auction proceeds, they agree to reinvest them. States have a large discretion over how they actually spent those. So I talked about the results of our analysis of the second compliance period. We did a comparable analysis of the first compliance period. New Jersey was a state that was in the original MOU. It participated in the first compliance period. It pulled out saying, too much of a jobs killer, the cost is too high. What New Jersey did with a large portion of its auction proceeds was to use them to plug sort of fiscal deficits that they were having, sort of giving the economic climate at that point. So New Jersey gets zero benefit in terms of the energy efficiency impacts, the renewable energy investment, and therefore, yes, of course, it's a net economic cost in your state. So again, the design of this system is incredibly important in sort of minimizing economic impact. The other point just to note is the states actually functioned incredibly well as a cohesive unit. So I'm not going to say that the 10 participating states are the most diverse when you think about the whole country, but there is a fair amount of diversity among the participating states in their political climate, in their generation base, some of the states being more coal-heavy than others, and yet the states were able to cooperatively agree upon some pretty major changes that were unexpected. Again, for example, the revised emissions cap following the 2012 program review. Okay, so very quickly, what is the Clean Power Plan? So, and I'm going to just give a high-level overview, assuming that not everyone is aware of the details, but it was brought by EPA under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. This is the first time it's been used for such a function, and there's a question as to whether it actually has the authority to do so. But what it is intended to require, as per the final rule, is individual state targets have been set for CO2 emissions for power plants. Interim targets are set for 2022 through 2029. You need to demonstrate that you're making progress to ultimately meet the final target, which is applicable in 2030. 3 building blocks were used by EPA in forming the state-specific standards. They required assumed heat rate improvements for coal-fired electric generating units, improved capacity factors for natural gas combined cycle facilities, and then an increase in renewable energy generation. Though those building blocks were used in determining what the state-specific targets are that must be met, each state has complete flexibility in determining how it is it's going to go about complying with those regulations. Every state needs to submit a state implementation plan laying out its proposed plan of action, demonstrating how its proposed plan is going to achieve the targets. States are able to meet, the Clean Power Plan state requirements were specified in two ways. One is a mass-based rate, meaning tons of CO2, the way that RGGI is set up, right? We've got a certain number of permits, a certain amount of tons of CO2 that can be emitted from the power sector. The other way that EPA has specified the state requirements is using a rate-based approach, meaning on average, every megawatt hour of electricity consumed in the state can have some, X number of tons of CO2, so it's a rate. So what has happened, EPA sets out its final Clean Power Plan in August 2015. It immediately sets off lots of litigation. What happened in January of last year is the DC Circuit Court of Appeals had declined to stay the rule, pending the results of litigation. It got pulled to the Supreme Court, who approved the stay. Last September, the DC Circuit Court heard oral arguments. So we are expecting a final decision out of that court on the legality of the Clean Power Plan. Could be very soon. It could be months away, but it is anticipated. Regardless of what the outcome is, you can be certain that there will be appeals filed. So we're expecting a decision soon. The story isn't over yet and won't be for a while. So what's been happening in the interim? Interestingly, there's been a divergence in the states over whether to actually proceed with any of this planning. The shading here probably does not surprise many of you. The RGGI states, for example, have continued to plow ahead with planning to meet these targets for 2030. Of note, Vermont is not actually covered under the Clean Power Plan because it has no in-state carbon dioxide emitting resources. Obviously, nuclear and renewables are excluded, and it imports quite a bit of power from Hydro-Quebec. So what are the opportunities presented by the Clean Power Plan for RGGI? Again, because states are given flexibility in deciding how to comply, the RGGI states could amend the cap of carbon dioxide emissions and have all of the states use that as their compliance mechanism. Other states could theoretically join RGGI and expand the market and again use that as the compliance mechanism. The experience of RGGI to date has shown again that states can effectively collaborate, work together to reduce CO2 emissions and generate positive net economic impacts for their regions. One thing to note is the entire RGGI program has operated seamlessly in terms of wholesale power markets. Lots of people worry about reliability issues. There's been none of that to date. What are some of the challenges in terms of integrating Clean Power Plan with RGGI? Again, RGGI is based on a mass-based emissions approach, so states seeking compliance with Clean Power Plan would be obligated to also then use a mass-based compliance approach. There's currently a difference in scope of who the affected sources are. RGGI covers all CO2 emitting power plants in the region, whether they're new or existing. Clean Power Plan targets only existing resources. New resources would be covered under 111B of the Clean Air Act, which is a new source review standard. So there's some integration that needs to be done there. There's also a bit of uncertainty as to whether the stringency of RGGI would be sufficient to meet Clean Power Plan targets as currently designed. Currently, RGGI, the emissions, the program ends in 2020, right? That's sort of the original MOU lays out a plan through 2020. Right now, we're in the 2016 program review, and we're anticipating that as a result of that, states are going to come out of that process with an agreement to continue to cap emissions through the year 2030. Lastly, the cost containment reserve throws another wrinkle in there in terms of actually knowing that you're going to be able to demonstrate compliance with this wild card of, hey, if auction prices get too high, we're going to release 10 million new permits for CO2 annually. So there's a number of issues that the states would need to work out, assuming that Clean Power Plan moves forward. I think there's a lot of optimism that the results to date have been very positive, and I think the states are hopeful that RGGI will continue to be an effective mechanism for regulating CO2. Questions?
What's you said the minimum was 25 megawatt power plant? Is there any future discussion or anything of that lower? That number? 25.
Yeah, not that I have heard. And the original idea is, look, if you've got a small cogen, you're really going to make them start to comply. So the idea was, let's target the larger plants, right, where you're actually getting the bulk of CO2 emissions from.
Since RGGI has been so successful, would more be better? Could we increase the costs for CO2? I saw on your slide that the highest they've ever gotten RGGI is $7.50 per ton. Whereas, I was just Googling real quick, some environmental groups think it should be as high as $220 per ton.
Sure. Yeah, there's differing views on the true cost of CO2. I think the idea of, I think it's politically more palatable where when you're setting up the design to provide assurance to the market of you're not going to get a CO2 permit price of $200, right? We have got mechanisms in place to contain the actual cost. So from an environmental standpoint, sure, let's price carbon according to the true cost, right, in terms of the environmental and public health harm of CO2. In reality, I don't think the political climate is terribly welcoming to something like that. So, in terms of being practical, moving forward, I think the range where they've been in has been pretty darn palatable. I think California's cap and trade program probably has higher prices. Western Climate Initiative may also have slightly higher prices. But again, California's got a pretty different political climate than at least some of the Northeast states that we're talking about. Yeah.
It's great to see the positive side of RGGI. I think there's a paradigm here. Those of us in the energy efficiency industry want higher electric rates that justify projects, and money comes from that. Mm-hmm. The problem is, you showed those red states. The cost of power in Georgia is 5 cents. The cost in North Carolina is 6 cents. So New England, which is losing jobs, losing manufacturing, big burden on people who live here for the high cost of utilities, is paying an undue burden for carbon. The people in Georgia could afford 2 or 3 more cents on their power bill. So I think there's a real disparity in this country. All those red states, most of them burn coal, okay? And I know that's going to change, but I don't think people in New England actually understand the difference in pricing of electricity in this country. It's 5 cents in Texas, okay? So the issue is, we're trying to do the right thing up here, and it's good for those of us in the efficiency market because that money's available to invest. But it's also, Georgia has some of the highest carbon rates per metric ton in the country. And so they're not, they're not participating. So I think that's the spin, but I think more good information about RGGI. New Hampshire's threatened a number of times to pull out, and they may.
Yeah.
Okay.
They also spent a good chunk of the auction proceeds in the first compliance period plugging fiscal deficits.
And that's the other piece that you brought up. Again, you tax me for a purpose, whether it's cigarettes or alcohol, and you don't use that money for its intended purpose, you use it to fill a budget. But that's a problem across the board.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One, in terms of the New England states and many of these blue states, there are energy efficiency resource standards in place, right, requiring load-serving entities to procure a certain amount of energy efficiency, capture a certain amount of energy efficiency every year. So those policies are separate from RGGI and any efforts to regulate CO2. But the other thing is the Clean Power Plan in setting those state-specific standards based on uniform building blocks, right? You're going to get hit in a state like Georgia, right? You're going to by 2030 need a relatively larger incremental reduction in CO2 than states that are already gas heavy, for example, or renewable heavy.
I think one of the other things that, excellent presentation, I gotta tell you, it was really good. But this is all helping to drive the technology that's been developed to get all this stuff, 14,000 new jobs. Well, a lot of those people are folks in this room who are driving those technological advances to make this work. I mean, you know, not for nothing, but some of these folks down in the coal country who are complaining about not having a job might think about, you know, this as an opportunity for them to use some of this money to re-educate folks that, you know, are complaining that that's not happening, right? So, I mean, I just see it as being a win-win-win-win-win-win-win. But anyway.
Rich, can we take the AEE bus for a southern tour and maybe bring this presentation to us?
Sure. All you can get. Cheap
We'll get
prices.
some security.
In Wyoming, by the way, there's a legislation, trying to put through legislation that all the power plants must stay coal. You can read that online right now if you want. So, interesting way about that. Go ahead, question. Absolutely.
You see Reggie, say the Clean Power Plan goes away with the current administration, do you see Reggie filling that gap in the Northeast?
Absolutely, I mean, that's the intent. Again, regardless of what happens at the national level, these states are proceeding with regulating CO2. I mean, my own personal opinion is the next 4 years or 8 years will be dominated by state level policy making. There's many programs in place. I mean, the train has left, right? I mean, we're not going to stop. And so I just think it's going to be shifting policy making to the state level as opposed to federal level.
Do you see any other states joining Reggie?
Well, so that, I mean, part of the hope, the thought is that through the 2016 program review, that sufficient redesign would be made such that it is easy for additional states just to tag on. Bigger market, you know, should provide more efficiencies. It's a proven sort of mechanism for effectively regulating carbon.
Okay. All right, that's it for the time thing. Let's give Andrea